Hello, and welcome to the Scientist Sage Sangha. I am really excited about the topic tonight, and I am Nancy Anderson Dolan from Wise Heart Wellness, too excited to even say my name. And this is a really interesting topic. We were just chatting with the people that are live before we started about that there wasn't a lot of research about it, and a lot of interesting feelings about it came up. But back to the definition to start with. It talks like at Cambridge Dictionary, talks about the quality of being gentle, loving, or kind. But I didn't quite feel that grasp the whole thing. And so there's lots of other pieces woven through the literature and definitions and things. It's a part of it's a feeling of concern, a connection like that, and a gentle affection. And there's a lot to do with affection. One of the writers even talks about if it isn't grounded in affection, actual affection, then it's not tenderness. And there's a whole bunch of other kind of things too that are things like in medical terms, there is tenderness at a site. I have a scar on my leg where my ankle was broken, and the doctor ran his hand down. Today, I almost hit the roof because it is really, really tender. And so there is this sensitivity sort of aspect of tenderness as well. And the tendency to sort of express what we might call warm feelings, compassionate feelings, and concern for the welfare of other people. Because without that concern, there's not tenderness. Referring to somebody that is actually taking care of something, like tending something. So there's this idea of actually taking care. So it's not just a feeling that I might have in my body, but it is tied to sort of an action or an idea of an action. And the food references, of course, that everybody will get, the difference between tender and tough. And so, like we tenderize food to make it palatable. And literally, one of the writers talks about tenderizing ourselves and our lives to make it palatable. And so the idea too, one last thing about being tender, like a tender is like an offer of something in business and things like that. And so there is all of those ideas wrapped up in it. The tenderness being an offering we give to someone or ourselves, and all of those things, like that it is a sensitive thing, that it is a feeling of concern, all of those things all wrapped up into it. So there's not a simple definition of tenderness. But I wanted to refer to the Pope Francis TED Talk. And I was looking at this quote about a revolution of tenderness and wanted to know where that term came from. And it turns out the Pope had a TED Talk. Who knew? Didn't know the Pope delivered things that way. Why not though? Brilliant. And he talks about that as love that comes close and becomes real. I love that line, that tenderness is that. This revolution of tenderness that he's talking about is that a way of being present with people that allows us to hear ourselves and them, and what we sort of say as the other person. So we can hear them both. And it affects us in such a way that we want to reach out in some way. So it isn't just a matter of listening, but we connect with it, and it takes us to a place of some kind of action. So tenderness has that active part to it as well. And he really talks a lot about listening deeply to our own hearts, our tender hearts. And to our own suffering and to other people's suffering, and we'll be able to respond to both lovingly. Not blaming it, shaming people or ourselves for, say, reaching out, maybe being difficult or being tender, feeling uncomfortable. No blaming or shaming or anything. And not ignoring it. Not ignoring other people's suffering or our suffering or our difficulty with their suffering, but really just a quality of moving into presence and continuing to move. And the last thing that he talked about that I wanted to mention was that that with tenderness, we can listen to the silent cry of our common home, meaning the planet. And that he thought that, under coming into that idea of tenderness would help us be present to the planet, and rather than be, in competition against other people and keep generating that kind of damage that comes from that. So it was really, really interesting. And the other part of it that wasn't written really clearly about, but he talked about that tenderness was being on the same level with another person. So it wasn't about being not pitying somebody, but being on the same level with them. And that was a really important part. And one of my own teachers really warns against pitying people, and because it can be great harm to them, taking them away from their sort of divine perfection. And it really comes across, the Pope Francis talks about tenderness is the path of choice for the strongest and most courageous. It is not a weakness, it's a fortitude. It is the path of solidarity, the path of humility. If we don't connect our power and humility with tenderness, we create havoc and ruin. So it was really interesting. So moving away from that powerful sort of spiritual person's perspective of it, there's a lot of other ideas. There's a whole different component of interpersonal relationships when we talk about being tender with someone. And it takes us into new places because it's a deeper connection. It's a vulnerability that we share with people. We connect with people. We step away from that us and them, and we really connect in a different way. And it's an affection. And so if we allow ourselves to develop affection for people, that's a step. We don't usually just do that really easily. But can you imagine if people are walking around actually looking to develop tenderness for people? That would be a really different world. People relating very differently. And that's part of the reason that lots of people are maybe unfamiliar or uncomfortable with tenderness, even, receiving it or giving it, because we don't have a lot of, concrete, societal rules about it, or, things like that. And it really is so important to be vulnerable in the world that way and go beyond that kindness. And kindness is great, but tenderness is another step beyond that. So that lots of times we don't have that deep intimacy with ourselves because we're too tied up with life. Maybe life is difficult and we're just surviving, or we may be grasping and trying to get something out of life, make it conform to our demands or dominate life in some way. And when we're doing that, when we're grasping or protecting, or we don't have room for that profound level of intimacy and vulnerability that tenderness comes from. And so, when we can get caught up in any of those things, we might be caught up in our own suffering and want to avoid that, or we might be afraid of someone else's suffering. Even just being present with ourselves closely enough to feel what someone else is feeling and have a tender response to it. That's a wide open situation, and we might be uncomfortable in that. So there's lots of good reasons that people block tenderness, because there's so many things that are a little uncomfortable and difficult with. But there is a huge there's huge benefits to tenderness, and there's an acceptance and a peace that comes with allowing tenderness and enacting tenderness. And we get to know ourselves more intimately, but other people as well. And I've been in the experience where I have had that tender feeling to somebody, and I sort of behave in that way. And I've actually had that person say, "Why do you like me?" And literally they were uncomfortable with me seeing who they were and saying, oh, yeah, that's amazing you behave like this. That's great. That's so, wow. And she was really, really uncomfortable with it. And it was interesting because it was that moment of connection. And she first connected with me closely, and then I could feel her back away, like, how close have I come to you? Oh no. So lots of reasons that it's not easy to move through. But literally, the most important place to start, of course, is tenderness with ourselves, so that we can be prepared for other people's tenderness with us. And we can move into that space where it generates and just flows through us automatically. It's not something we have to think about being tender, that we can just let it happen. And it's interesting because to have more tenderness in our relationships, with most of us, that's what we would like, to have more tenderness in our relationships. We have to literally do that with ourselves, first of all. And there's a lovely therapist, so let me see her name, Kobe Campbell. And she recommends each day starting, now this is just revolutionary for me to think about, starting each day by tuning in to what we need instead of what we have to do. And it's like, oh my goodness, that would be a step towards tenderness for me, for sure. Because I have a to-do list. I don't have a to be tender list. And I think that I might add that to my to-do list if I need to there. But that idea of just starting each day, investigating what I need and approaching those needs with some gentleness and tenderness. So that idea of it, there's some others from my approach to life had been when I get up in the morning to, say good morning, like, look at you, you made it another day. And at nighttime, go, congratulations, you made it through the day. And just being with myself in that way, recognizing things. And there's another practice that Tara Brach suggested about saying, I love you to the mirror. And one of the more famous mindfulness teachers thought they'd go and try this, and they were shocked because they couldn't do it. And they went back to her and said, I tried that, but that, I just couldn't make myself do it with any authenticity. And so she changed it a little bit. She just started saying good morning. And then she started working up to good morning, I love you. But so many of us have this hidden distance from ourselves. And that distance is what keeps us from receiving tenderness as well as giving it, moving into those tender relationships. One of the ones that I moved towards is using, I was working with some young addicts last night, and we were talking about, we could use ideas of people or, images of divine beings or something that is easier for us to be with than another real live person or ourselves, that we could exchange those kinds of greetings and think about being treated tenderly. And for one person, it was a deceased parent. And for another one, it was feeling like the stars wrapped her in tenderness. So they had some amazing ideas about how to experience tenderness and how to create that feeling of it around us. So, and just the exploration of it is the point here. And of course, the intention to explore it always comes first. The intention always comes first. Like, maybe this is a good plan. This could make my life feel significantly different. Most of the time, people can be much more tender with their pets than their partners. Just do a little check on that one. If I was live in a room, I would ask people to raise their hands about what they agreed with that or not. But most of the time, it truly is. So those ideas about doing that and being with yourself in a more tender way, trying it on, seeing how it is, and stopping and taking it in when you do have it, whether it's with a pet or whether it's with a person, or whether it's just a feeling that you might have in your body. because your body starts to feel very different. It loosens up and it opens up and it softens up when you let that urge of tenderness move through you. And if you let someone else's tenderness come in. So it's not just helpfulness, just not kindness. It really is opening up, like, you and I are friends. You and I are on the planet in the same way, and really let ourselves connect. And it's not like I have this mastered. I want to be very clear about that. Often it's almost a shock to my system if someone sort of advances tenderness towards me, and I have to really discipline myself to sit still and just I feel a reaction against it, and then I can loosen up a little bit and let a little bit in. And then there's this beautiful experience that moves back and forth between me and the other person. And we can feel that tenderness. And that is exquisite. It's a different thing than a love relationship. It's a different thing than a parent and child even, although tenderness is a big part of that. So I really, I could be a tenderness salesperson here. It's worth the effort is what I'm saying. Even with yourself, because if you can start to open up to the idea of being tender with yourself, then when you are in a difficult moment, whether that is external, sort of imposed upon you, or whether it's coming up from an internal place of maybe a past experience or worries of your current time, being tender with ourselves at that time doesn't mean we push away feelings. It means we make a gentle container for them. And so that we are gentle with ourselves, being understanding to ourselves, not saying, okay, suck it up, move through this. It's like, okay, it's okay what you're going through, and I'm here. I'm not going to run away. So all these kinds of things that start to open us up. When we do that, there is this natural flow of tenderness that starts to come through us. One of the last places I was suggesting people find it were things like movies and books and things like that. Because one of the ways that I learned to behave in those ways was watching other people. And they would do something, I'm like, wow, they could just step in and do that. I didn't have that flow in me. And as I found it, I literally saw it in a movie. I'm like, huh. And it wasn't like I went out and did that, because that would be, without that affection or that sort of thing. But what I started to do was wonder if I could feel that. And then I noticed that I did feel it. And I didn't feel safe enough to express it. And so I practiced on myself, and then I started practicing on other people. And it was interesting because the vast majority were able to take it and come back, take it and come back. So it's sort of like a flow of energy between people. And so this idea, now, really, we want to sort of collect these memories up, like we would keep them in our jewelry box, and remember them and come back to them. Because we might go through periods of time where we're not feeling like that, or we might go through periods of time where people are not responding to us like that. And it's useful to have these and practice them. And it's like priming a pump. This may be a little too old-fashioned for some of the people watching, but if you ever had a pump out in the wilderness, like just a handle and a metal pump that you actually had to pump up and down like this many, many times before the water would actually start to run, you call that priming the pump. And so collecting those memories and remembering them, going over them, primes the pump for tenderness to come up from the deep well within us too, because it's there. Just let me take them. I think I want to stop talking like that there and really do a little practice. Okay, so get comfortable. And what I want you to do is, if you have a memory, bring that up. And for some of us, it might be, holding a newborn. For some of us, it might be cuddling our pets. And it might be in a time of difficulty where you were really being present for someone else, or someone else was really able to be with you. And just, again, have that intention to open up to that feeling of tenderness. Perhaps even inviting your body to relax into that tenderness. And see what other feelings might come with that. For some of us, there might be some fear. For some of us, it might be feeling like getting into a nice warm bath and our bodies relax and open up. When I work with people, I literally have this wonderful field of tenderness that comes up because I'm so enamored, so impressed with people that are willing to open up to difficult feelings. And I can sit in that field of tenderness with them. I've been there before and look at you go. And it's just this lovely field of tenderness. So tenderness is not always around good feelings, but there are good feelings that come with tenderness. You might remember a time when someone was holding you in some tenderness or providing you tenderness. And you might feel that safety that comes with that feeling of tenderness. That real, authentic feeling cared for. That goes beyond somebody just being kind to you. But they really see you and accept you right where you are, right where you are. And they're not above you, they're just with you. And if you don't have a memory like this, I'm going to encourage you right now to imagine that. For the people that are live with me tonight, I am pretty sure that there are people with us that have very tender feelings for other people in the Zoom group here. And that interesting mixture of a soft affection and admiration and just connection. Like, I felt that too. Yeah. And so lock this into your body, because tenderness is very, very much an embodied experience. When our bodies are too tight, too defensive, it's hard to feel that tenderness energy, either coming in or moving out from you. So remember that embodied presence of tenderness. Just the deep connection, no need to put up walls of any kind. Just let it shine on you for a couple more minutes, just like you're sitting in the warm spring sun. And just sit there while I say a few last words, and then we'll shut down the recorded portion and discuss this a little further. All of the people that I was reading their wise words about tenderness, about talked about how important in these times it was to cultivate tenderness. Move away from that defensiveness and separation, really cultivate that tender presence. And just the perks are great. As we practice and allow tenderness, we actually become kinder and gentler people. And we feel more alive. That energy going back and forth between us and other people, we feel deeply connected to ourselves because that tenderness comes from a very deep place in ourselves, deep in our hearts, and to other people, because tenderness is like a divine thread that connects us. When we have that moment, we want to reach out to that person, or connect with the idea we felt the same way. It's a we instead of an us all of a sudden. It's our pain, not their pain or my pain. It's our joy. We get to share it. Yeah, so literally, we also feel at home more in our skin and happy to be there. And I know a lot of people that are seeking that, wanting to be happy in their skin. And it comes from becoming more interested in the direct experience of life. We don't want to be performing it anymore. We want to be in it. So that's my sales pitch for tenderness. And I hope that you can open up to some tenderness in your life and that flow coming from you and the bravery and vulnerability that it takes to share it with another person. So thank you so much for joining us. Until we see you again, to the people that will join us after the live session, I am with you. You are with me. Blessed be. Good night.